All right. So welcome everybody to this CARP Nova Scotia Build Strength and Balance Today workshop with Laura Lundquist. We're very happy to have so many of you with us and hope you you enjoy it. As I said earlier, we will be recording it, so you'll be able to see it later on. For those of you who don't know, we have regular CARP Nova Scotia webinars and national webinars. If you're not on our CARP newsletter mailing list, send us an email and we'll be glad to put you on and keep you up to date with all of these webinars. You can reach us best either by going to our carpnovascotia.ca website, or you can email me directly at vangorder, VANGORDER, at carp.ca, and we'll put you on the mailing list. We will be starting in 1 minute. Welcome to all of you. Laura is ready to go, and I see a few more people still coming in. I'll check my email to see if anybody has any problems. No, that's good. I did send everybody the link again, and it's out, I see, so everybody should be able to get in. All right, it is 7:30, so I am very pleased to introduce Laura to all of you, and rather than me reading her introduction, I'm going to ask Laura if she will introduce herself and begin her presentation. And thank you very much for doing this, Laura.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Bill. It's really a pleasure to be here, and I want to thank you and CARP for making it happen. I'm excited to be involved and to share some information with you today, and hopefully open your eyes to a few different ideas and leave you with a few exercises to walk away at least contemplating, if nothing else. I was saying, just as people were logging on, I love having this picture here. This is my daughter, Hazel, at age 3. And I was saying, you know, only a 3-year-old would pick a spot like this on the top of a rock where she could only fit her body if she was crunched into the smallest ball possible. And she was perfectly happy there, just gazing off onto the horizon and the ocean. So obviously, we start off life with pretty good balance, strength, and mobility. And then along the way, sometimes we hit some hiccups. And so today I want to talk about those hiccups and what we can do about them. I will give you a little information about me. So I am a physiotherapist. I've been practicing since 2003. I did my training at McMaster University in Ontario, actually, and have worked in Ontario, BC, back in Ontario, and then back here in Nova Scotia since 2006. I do, from a professional standpoint, I hold the highest credentials that are recognized in Canada for orthopedic physiotherapy, which would be like hands-on treatment, and also in sport physiotherapy. So I've been fortunate to do some travel with Canada's national teams to the World University Games and the Pan American Games, and traveling with some of our national teams. I opened Zoomers, though, in 2018 because I recognized in clinical practice, although I was very, I would say, helpful or successful in connecting my younger patient demographic, the sort of 18 to 35-year-olds, with community resources once I had finished helping them rehab from their injuries, connecting them with exercise programs, mobility programs, whatever it was they needed to do so that they didn't need to see me anymore. But for my older clientele, and by older, I really only mean about 45 and up, there weren't necessarily appropriate places to go to get fitness that was appropriate. And so that was where the idea for Zoomers really became solidified. And we're happy here to provide health and fitness services that are really tailored towards allowing healthy, active aging for Canadians. The picture here that you see is me, obviously, my husband Gord in the back there, and my 2 children, Hazel and Oscar, who are now 4 and 6, and we're about to venture into home online schooling tomorrow morning. So that will be our next great adventure. But that's a little bit about me and how I came to be in this role at Zoomers, and I'll give you a bit more information about Zoomers and what we do here at the end. But that just gives you a little bit of a context. So my takeaways that I hope at the end of today you can walk away with is that I hope you have a better understanding of the normal age-related changes that can affect your strength, your balance, your mobility, and subsequently your risk of falling. And confidence in knowing that you can impact your falls risk and why that's important. And then hopefully you also have some enthusiasm to reevaluate your own plan, make sure you're setting yourself up for success and that you have the right tools at your disposal and you're making use of the right tools in order to reduce your risk of falling as much as possible and try to maximize and optimize your quality of life, as that is ultimately what it's all about. In order to get to those takeaways, we are going to talk about lifespan versus health span, which is sometimes a different concept for people. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Then we're going to talk about risk factors for falling, and then the normal age-related changes that can affect that falls risk. I'll also do a little exercise demonstration, and we can do those exercises together. You will certainly be invited to try those exercises with me if you like. Although I will say, you know your own abilities. Obviously, I'm not interacting with you directly one-on-one today, so if something is not safe or you don't feel comfortable to try something, by all means, feel free to watch and not participate. Then we'll talk a little bit about self-assessment tools so you can figure out kind of where you stand at this point. And then we'll wrap things up and I'll be happy to answer your questions at the end. I like to start by thinking about this quote. It's one of my favorites out there, which is, if you don't take time for your wellness, you will be forced to take time for your illness. It's very easy these days. We live busy lives, and it's easy to push some of those relatively, I don't want to say simple, but the sort of straightforward things like exercise, eating right, all those things. Sometimes it's easy to put those things to the side in the effort to get through our busy lives. But if we don't take time to do those things, to manage our health and wellness when we're well, then it is inevitable that at some point we are going to be forced to take time for our illness. And this brings me to this concept of lifespan versus health span. So lifespan or life expectancy is something that most of us have thought about or talked about before. Life expectancy obviously is the amount of time that people on average are alive. And so it continues to increase in Canada thanks to the improvements in science and medical care. For women in Canada now, the average life expectancy would be just under 84 years. And for men, it would be just under 80 years. However, there is also something that the World Health Organization has started recognizing, called the health-adjusted life expectancy. And this would be along the concept of health span. And what that means is it's the period of time that someone is expected to live healthy or free of serious disease. And so when we look at these numbers, the HALE numbers, you can see that those numbers actually are quite different from the life expectancy. So for women, we would expect a health-adjusted life expectancy to be 70.5 years or 70 and a half years, and for men, 69 years. And the reason that this is important is that when we think about longevity and trying to have a nice, long, well-lived life, we aren't necessarily thinking about years lived with disability, dysfunction, and lower quality of life. And if we look at the disparity or the difference between those two numbers, it tells us that women in Canada, on average, will spend 16% of their life living with a lower quality of life. So with that reduced health span versus lifespan. And for men, about 14% of their total life would have reduced quality. And that works out to about 13 years for women and 10 years for men. So obviously, health span should be something that we're trying to close that gap, right? We want, presumably, to live more years healthfully and feeling well and being able to do the things that we love. At Zoomers here, our motto is, you can see part of it up behind me there, is live the life you love. And we can really only do that if we have the physical and mental ability to participate in the activities that bring us joy. So thinking about health span then, we want to know, how can we improve our health span, right? So some of these things are not going to be groundbreaking to you. So having a healthy, balanced diet, avoiding smoking and excessive alcohol consumption are all things that can contribute to our health span or improving our health span. Maintaining intellectual stimulation. So, lots of us now will do crossword puzzles and things to keep our brains working. We know that that has a really positive influence on cognitive abilities and maintaining the strength and power in our brain. And so making sure that we continue to have ways to do that is important for positively influencing the health span. Another thing that's really important is maintaining social connectivity. And I could spend a whole 45 minutes talking about this, but I won't. But I just put a little name there, Susan Pinker, who's actually a Canadian psychologist. She did a fantastic TED Talk in 2017. And I would encourage you, if you have a few minutes, to just Google it and give it a watch. And what she talks about is some research that shows how important it is to have regular social connection, both a tight circle of people who that you can really rely on. They would say somebody that you can call for a loan, those kinds of friends and family, as well as just more acquaintance level connectivity, but just the number of people that you get in touch with in a regular week or a regular day. And how important that social connectivity is to influencing longevity and how healthy people are. And so I think, especially during COVID times, we've seen how much social connectivity can have an influence on our health span. So I will leave it at that. But if that's piqued your interest, do just Google Susan Pinker TED Talk, and you'll be sure to find it. And it's a worthwhile watch. Another thing that positively influences the health span is a routine of moderate exercise. So these last two pieces are where we're going to spend most of our time talking tonight. And so as a physiotherapist and as a sport physiotherapist, exercise is a big part of what I believe in and what I use to help people feel better and live better quality of life. And in addition to exercise, it's also important to make sure that we're reducing our risk of injury. And so, and that's important because if we have an injury, then that can influence our ability to maintain moderate exercise, have social connectivity, do the intellectual stimulation because of the impacts that it potentially has for us. So falls is the risk that we're going to talk about today. And here's just a little reality check. 1 in 3 adults over the age of 65 will fall this year. And over half of those people will sustain injuries that threaten their mobility and independence. If we go into the higher demographics, so into the 80-year-olds, those who are 80 and up, half of those people have reported falls every year. And we know that more people fall than report their falls, so probably those numbers are actually low in comparison to what is actually happening out there. And if we have falls that threaten our mobility and our independence, obviously that is going to negatively influence that health span, right? Taking away years of good quality of life. An interesting little fact is hip fractures obviously are a common issue associated with falling for older adults. And mortality for all causes is 3 times higher for someone who has sustained a hip fracture due to a fall. And that often is because their ability to get around, to, again, interact with people, to maintain regular exercise is all negatively impacted. And as a result, often there are other health consequences for that. Other conditions start to become a problem and the health starts to deteriorate. So, risk factors for falling, we got to know in order to prevent them or minimize the risk, we need to know what those risk factors are, what contributes to falls. And we usually separate out our risk factors into non-modifiable, so things that we really can't influence or change, and then modifiable factors, things that we can influence or change. So the non-modifiables would be age. The older we are, the more likely we are to fall. A history of falls actually increases your risk for falls. So we can't change that after you've fallen. We can't change history, but we know that the fact that you fell already makes you more at risk for a fall in the future. And also chronic conditions that affect sensation and mobility, things like diabetes perhaps, or Parkinson's, or anything that affects your ability to move in a coordinated manner and easily, or affects your ability to feel your foot on the floor, those things can really increase our risk for falls. This is not an exhaustive list, but that gives you an idea of some of them. Modifiable would be things that we can sometimes change. So certainly there are some medications that can contribute to dizziness and loss of balance. So that's a factor that we need to think about and that is worth discussing with your physician or your healthcare team. Improper use of gait aids. So gait aids, things like Nordic poles, are a fantastic way actually to reduce your falls risk. However, not if they're used improperly, right? So making sure that you have the proper use is important. And if you are improperly using them, instead of being helpful, they can then become actually a risk factor. Reduced vision or changes in vision also can contribute to increasing risk for falls, as well as loss of strength, loss of balance, and a fear of falling. So if we're worried about falling, we actually are more likely to sustain a fall. And so having confidence in our movement is a really important factor in terms of reducing our risk of falling. So, this is my daughter Hazel, not a Santa fan. Much happier on the rock at the ocean. So here's the bad news. The bad news is, as we get older, we know that we have decreased cardiovascular endurance, decreased flexibility, decreased strength, and decreased balance, all of which contribute to that increased falls risk, right? So with cardiovascular endurance, that's the ability of our heart and lungs to bring in enough oxygen and distribute it through our body to keep our energy levels up and allow us to do the activities that we want to do at the intensity that we want to do them. Certainly by the age of 45, 50, most people start finding that they feel a little stiffer in the morning. So they start to notice that their muscles and joints just aren't quite as flexible as they were before. And that's largely attributed to, sometimes to disuse, but largely attributed to the fact that we actually hold less water in our tissues as we get older. And so those tissues just lose their pliability or their elasticity to a certain extent. Decreasing strength is also a normal age-related change that actually starts after the age of 30. So most of us peak at 30, and it's a downhill slide after that. And it's a downhill slide at an average rate of 1% to 2% per year, which means in a decade, you might lose somewhere between 10 and 20% of the overall strength in your muscles. So that's a big statistic. And as we get older, that rate tends to ramp up. So perhaps in our 30s, 40s, 50s, we might be more in the 1% range. And then as we carry on into our 60s, 70s, 80s, we start to see that it ramps up and gets maybe closer to that 2% range per year. Balance is also negatively impacted as we get older. Our vestibular system in our inner ear just typically doesn't function quite as well. We do also have reduction in our vision, and both of those systems contribute to our ability to maintain balance. And there are also changes in our muscles and joints that affect our balance system. So there is good news. This is Hazel on a happier day. No Santa in sight. All of those factors are modifiable age-related changes. So we don't have to be stuck with them, but as opposed to in our 30s, when perhaps we could maybe largely ignore, 20s and 30s, we might be able to ignore maintaining cardiovascular endurance, which is heart and lung health, maintaining our flexibility, strength, and balance. As we move through our 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and beyond, then we have more responsibility for maintaining these systems. We have to pay attention to them, notice where there's change, and then make sure that the plan that we're following is setting us up for success in terms of being able to reduce our risk of injury and illness. And one of those things would be reducing our risk of falls. This is my son, Oscar. His technique needs a little work in the overhead press, but he was a pretty eager participant here, so I thought I'd give him a little cameo too. So then the question is, what do you need to do? So we know that these systems, cardiovascular endurance, flexibility, strength, and balance, are the ones that we really want to think about. But not everybody needs to necessarily work, or at least work to the same extent on every system. So it's important to know your own body. And there's two little tests here that I'm going to give you a chance to do. So I will encourage you, if you like, to stand up. If you've got a chair there, I'm going to set a timer. And what I want you to do is position yourself. Oh, there we go. Get my timer rolling. So you're going to position yourself in your chair, and I'm going to sit back. I'm going to just come off my chair just for a moment here. This is the tech moment of the day, always. Oh, maybe not. Okay, I'm going to stay on this screen. So here we are. I'm going to sit in my chair like this. So I've got my feet and knees hip width apart. I've got my self just sitting towards the front of my seat. And if you can do it, I want you to have your hands across your chest. If you need to use your hands, that's fine to help get out of the chair. But if you can do it without your hands, I want you to do it without your hands. And you're going to stand up and sit down, up and down like this, coming all the way up and all the way down. And I'm going to give you 30 seconds to do as many as you can. So here comes the 30 seconds. I shouldn't have shown you this list ahead of time, but ready, set, go. So start going up and down, nice and easy. You're almost 10 seconds in. If anything's sore again, if you don't feel appropriate to do this, then by all means just hang tight here while everybody has a chance to do it themselves. You're at the halfway mark. Keep going. Make sure those knees stay hip width apart. You don't want your knees to be touching each other. Don't forget to breathe. Very important for those muscles. You've got 5 seconds left. 2, 1, and relax. Good. All right, so catch your breath. And then have a look at this graph. So on the left-hand side here, you see the 30-second sit-to-stand norm. So you just went from sitting to standing as many times as you could in 30 seconds. And that gives us a good estimate of your leg strength. So you can see here there are 2 columns, one for women, one for men. Make sure you're looking in the right column. It does make a bit of a difference. And then find your age bracket there, your cohort. They're in 5-year groupings. And then just have a look to see what your number is and where you fall in the average. Now, these are average that don't take into consideration if you've had a knee replacement, if you have a hip injury, if you've had trouble with your back. So take it all with a grain of salt, but it does give you an idea of where you stand with regard to leg strength compared to the quote-unquote average or normal. The other exercise test that's really helpful to do is this single leg balance. And so we won't do this for a long time, but I want you just to have a look here. And if you're standing right now, you can just give it a quick try. Stand on one leg with your hands on your hips and just try to hold that position without bracing your legs together and see how many seconds you can hold without losing your balance or having your hands come off your hips. A lot of people are surprised that, if we were looking at folks who were 60 to 70, basically 60 to 69, that you should be able to hold that somewhere between 25 and 28 seconds. That's a pretty long time. A lot of people find that if that's not doing that kind of exercise hasn't been part of their regular practice, that actually is quite difficult to do. So that just gives you an idea of how you measure up. And when if you access this program later, then you could always have a look at it then and give yourself a chance to really go through the tests if you didn't already do it tonight. So that gives you a little idea of where you are. And then I want to talk about the Canadian Physical Activity Guidelines because it's important to know what's being recommended in terms of regular physical activity. And so these are the guidelines for adults age 65 years and older. But for adults age 18 to 64, it's effectively the same with just perhaps slightly higher intensity of activity for the age group that's below 65. But basically, we want to have 2.5 hours or 150 minutes of cardiovascular activity every week. It can be broken down into 10-minute bouts or more, but at least 10 minutes at a time. We also, though, and I feel like the cardiovascular piece is something that has been part of the conversation in general health for a long time, but it's the strength and balance piece that has been less publicized. It hasn't been, I feel like the sort of boom of aerobics in the 80s and 90s lost sight a little bit of the importance of strength and balance work. And with the introduction of CrossFit and its popularity in the last few years, I think that strength and balance work is starting to get a little bit more recognition. But it's important for all groups, not just those who are doing heavy Olympic lifts. So the recommendation, again, for older adults would be muscle strengthening exercises at least 2 days per week using the major muscle groups. And that also working on balance should be happening happening on a regular basis. They don't put a number on there, but I would say as a physio, I would often recommend at least 3 or 4 times a week, but that kind of work could be done every day. Strength exercise, tough strength exercise shouldn't be done every day. Balance exercise could be done every day. And more physical activity provides greater health benefits. So this is really intended as the minimum. And if you're able to do more, you're likely to see greater benefits, which again, remember when we go back to that health span idea, how do we positively influence it? Maintaining a regular routine of moderate exercise was one of the key ways to do that. And we want to reduce our falls risk in order to make sure that we can continue to maintain our physical activity levels. So this is the active portion of the night. So we're going to go through these couple of exercises that you can try here. So there are pictures on the screen, and then I'm just going to demonstrate them for you too. These are 2 great strengthening exercises that contribute to strengthening in the lower body, which is helpful for maintaining our muscle strength, again, so that we hopefully reduce the risk of a stumble in the first place because we have strong power in the legs, but also the ability to catch ourselves if we do have a stumble and have to have a quick step, that we have the muscle strength to actually catch our body in that moment. The sit to stand exercise, which was that test that we did just a few minutes ago, is probably my favorite exercise. Anybody who does exercise classes with me knows you're not getting out of class without doing some sit to stands, unless we're doing Tai Chi. That's the only one I haven't snuck it in. But everything else, we've got sit to stands or squats in the class because it's so valuable and so important. So let's go through that technique again. And again, feel free to join along with me if you like. So you're going to sit in your chair towards the front of the chair. It's very common for the knees to want to come together in this exercise. And that's a sign of some weakness in the hips and will contribute to knees being sore or low backs being sore. So we want to make sure that the knees are apart. I usually measure by 2 fists, just like that. And then squeezing the thigh and the buttock muscles as we stand up and sit back down. And it's just as simple as that. It's a great exercise that you can incorporate in, again, 2 or 3 times a week. And I hesitate to give specific numbers and how many reps and sets to do, because that part is a little bit individual and is a good idea to connect with a healthcare provider like a physiotherapist who can assess what your abilities are and give you the right prescription to give you the strength gains that you want to see. But it's a great exercise that you can play with a little bit. The next one you see here is the heel raise. So that's strengthening exercise for the calf muscle in the lower leg. So you can see in the picture there that I'm going up on my toes and I'm holding something for balance. In this exercise, it's very normal to lose our balance as we get up towards the ball of our foot. And so it is not, when we're doing this exercise, we're not doing it for balance, we're doing it for strengthening, typically, or at least in the way I'm talking about it here tonight. And so for that purpose, I actually want you to hold something so that you can control the position well. Because if your body is sort of flailing about as you go up and down on the toes, which if you're trying now, you may be feeling, then you're not going to get the same benefit from a strength perspective. One important piece on this, so in the sit to stand, we wanted to think about having the knees apart. When we go up on the toes, we want to think about keeping the pressure or maintaining the pressure underneath the ball of the foot. We often will feel like we roll out towards the outside of the foot or towards the little toe. And that is the way, if you imagine the way an ankle sprains, it often rolls to the outside like that. So we want to train our feet and ankles to maintain that neutral position with pressure underneath the ball of the foot so that we're less likely to roll the ankle over. Is certainly if we invert the ankle or roll the ankle like that, that can contribute to a fall quite quickly and quite easily. So those are 2 great strength exercises that contribute to improving your strength, to reducing that falls risk. Now going on to balance exercises. So the first one you see on the left-hand side of your screen here is called the Tandem Walk. And so the Tandem Walk is when we're in the position that you see my client here, where she's got one heel touching the toe in front, and then you step forward again in that same position, touching the heel to toe each time, like you're walking on a balance beam. And this reduces, so just give it a try right now if you've got the space and you feel safe to do so. It's because we take the legs from the wider base of support where we would typically be and take them onto that smaller base, then it becomes much more wiggly and it's much harder to control that position. Practicing this is a really good way to uptrain the balance system. I always say to people, it's not that I'm preparing you to do a tightrope walk over Niagara Falls, but there are lots of times when if somebody unexpectedly cuts you off a little bit on a sidewalk or something happens and you need to stop quickly or change direction, or in a restaurant, if you need to go behind a chair and there's not much space between the chair and the wall, we often have to bring our legs into that smaller base of support position. And so if we've practiced being in that position, then we'll have better control there, far less likely to have a stumble or a fall. The other balance exercise that's here is the single leg balance. So you can see I was doing this here with a client in class. And again, maintaining that nice upright position, you want to practice having one foot up off the ground. And then depending on your balance ability and your stability, it's a good idea to always do this exercise close to something so that you can touch it if you need to. But you want to try to do your one leg balance work without touching anything. Because as soon as, and again, if you're up on your feet right now and you feel comfortable to do it, try standing on one foot and with your hands on your hips and feel how, you probably feel a little bit of unsteadiness there. And then just take one finger and touch the table or the computer in front of you and see how different that feels. You likely right away feel like you have more stability. And that's just because it gives your brain a little bit more information about where your body is in space. So just a little touch on something, even though people say, oh, I just had my fingertip just barely touching the wall, it makes all the difference in the world in terms of the benefit of the exercise. And again, when people wonder about the value of practicing one leg stand, like I don't spend my days standing on one leg, but in reality, if you're out walking, it's a one leg stand after the other, right? One leg stand, one leg stand, one leg stand as you walk. Momentum carries you through, so even if you don't have great stability, sometimes you can get away with it. But again, if something unexpected happens and you're not really controlling that one leg position, then that becomes a big issue in terms of the risk of falling or having a stumble. From a flexibility perspective, so those were two good balance exercises, but from a flexibility perspective, there are a couple muscles that are really good to work on to ensure that our lower leg can move freely and we're less likely to catch our toe, for instance, when we're walking. So the first one that you see here on the left side of the screen is the hip flexor stretch, and that's for the muscle that's at the top of your hip at the front. And in this stretch, you can see that I just step one leg back and then holding my body nice and upright, lean forward slightly or translate forward slightly to feel a stretch at the front of the hip. I'm going to demonstrate for 1 second because this is one that I see performed incorrectly a lot of the time. So in the picture there, I've got my leg back, my heel is up, my body's nice and tall, and I'm just translating my body weight forward slightly to feel a stretch at the front of the hip. What I often see people do is lean back like this to try to get a stretch here. And although eventually you will get a stretch in your hip if you lean back, for a lot of my clients that actually induces some lower back pain before they ever get to the hip stretch. So I always recommend being in this position, nice and upright, and then just translating forward as opposed to bending backward. The other stretch that's really important is the calf stretch. So this is, we were doing our calf strengthening by going up and down on the toes. So it needs to be strong, that muscle, but it also needs to be flexible because if it's tight, it's hard for us to lift our toes up when we're walking. We're more likely to catch our toe on uneven terrain. So in this one, it's a very similar position to the hip flexor stretch, except that we keep the heel down. And right away, usually people will feel that they're stretching in the calf in that position. It doesn't take too much forward pressure to do that. So those are 6 great exercises, a couple of strength, a couple of balance, and a couple of flexibility exercises that you might think about incorporating into your routine in order to help you work on your strength, balance, and flexibility as it relates to falls risk. So a couple of important takeaways from today is understanding factors that affect your future risk of falling. So you need to understand your own body and then and how that impacts your risk. And then it's also so important to understand that you have the power to reduce that risk by implementing some pretty simple strategies and exercises, but you got to do it now while you're feeling well. You certainly can do it later if you've had a fall. It's never too late to work on these things, but the sooner you do it, the better. And people who start doing this work when they're feeling well are far more likely to have a longer health span, and that just leads to better quality of life and enjoying the things that you love. The last thing I'll say on this is that I often talk about strength as a bank account. So we all have a bank account of strength. And the more deposits you put in that bank account today while you're feeling well really can pay dividends tomorrow, so that you can make withdrawals from that. If you've got a period of time where you're less active for some reason, but you've been doing lots of activity, your body can handle those periods of relative less activity much better because you've got a strong bank account. You've sort of filled it up for a rainy day, so to speak. So just a little bit about how we can help you at Zoomers and what we're all about here. I said at the beginning that our focus here is empowering adults to live to their potential and to live the life they love. And one of the ways that we do that is if a lot of people need help understanding what they need. And so we have something called the Fit for Life Physiotherapy Assessment, which is an hour-long visit with our physiotherapist here, where we bring people in and talk about what activities you're doing, what you want to be doing, and have a look at how your body is moving. We look at your strength, balance, mobility, flexibility, and help you identify which areas need work and give you some strategies that can help with that. So that's one way that we might be able to help you if you're inspired after my session here today. And if you're ready to build strength and stability, you know you want to do it and you need some help and guidance along the way, then Club Z is the program that we have that is really built for you. We launched it in January. We've been doing fitness classes since we started here at Zoomers, since we opened. But in January, we finally had enough staff and enough clientele to launch this monthly membership program that offers 12 different classes every week. And fortunately, we do them virtually. So there is typically an opportunity to come in and do them in studio here. I'm in the exercise studio tonight. But we also broadcast them live. And we can always, just like in a Zoom call, we can see and hear you, and you can see and hear us while you're exercising. And we found that to be so helpful for people, especially during COVID, to help them stay moving and feeling stronger and better balanced coming out of lockdowns, as opposed to feeling like they'd lost ground a little bit. And we're really, again, like I said at the beginning, we're excited to be part of the CARP group and to participate in this session with you. And so as a thank you for your attendance tonight, we're happy to offer 50% off the Club Z membership for May for anybody who's attended this or who hears about us through CARP. So if that's of interest to you, then Bill and I will sort out a way for you to reach out to us, and we'd be happy to see you online sometime soon. Last thing, as far as staying connected with us, we are quite active in the social media digital space. So we have a website that's got lots of great information there at zoomershealth.ca. We're also quite active on Facebook. And we also have a YouTube channel where we share a lot of really valuable tidbits on exercise basics and moving through your day a little bit more comfortably. Just some of the little tips that you tend to get from a physiotherapist when you come in. We've recorded those for you and are uploading new videos there every week. So it's a great idea to go there, subscribe, hit the notification bell so that it tells you when we've posted something new. And and we'd be happy to interact with you there. And then the last thing is we do lots of special events. So last week I did a different online presentation like this for folks in our Zoomers community. And we've got one coming up next week, our Get Moving with Mom, in celebration of the mothers out there for Mother's Day. And so all mothers, grandmothers, daughters are welcome to do a 30-minute, just easy flow style class, which is just some gentle movement and stretching with my mom and I virtually. Mom and I were planning to be in the gym together, but now we will be together but apart online. And anyway, it's a free online registration, and you can just do that through our zoomershealth.ca website. There's a book online button, and you can go through there. The last thing I'll leave you with here is that I'm known for saying this: the easiest way to manage an injury is not to have one at all, right? So I don't know what the etiquette is on quoting yourself, but I decided I would do it because I thought it was relevant to what we were talking about tonight. A lot of things can be avoided with a little ounce of prevention. And so hopefully I've given you some things to think about tonight, and I'll be happy to take your questions. There are a couple pictures of our team here all masked up and spread out, and Kathy from our front desk, and then the shot on the bottom left there is a version of me doing one of these live classes. So.
Well, thank you very much, Laura. That was really interesting, worthwhile. I could see many people's rapt attention. In fact, you did such a good job explaining what it was all about, other than a thank you, a couple of thank yous in the chats. Nobody has asked any questions in the chat. So I will ask, we have a couple of minutes left. If anybody would like to orally ask a question, just unmute yourself and do so, or put it in the chat and I will ask Laura. I don't see.
Yes, Carol?
Yeah. I'm wondering what you think about Tai Chi.
I love it. I teach it.
Right. So
yeah.
It's recommended as being, I know it's very good for balance, but do you find also for flexibility?
Yeah, I think so. There are a number of different types of Tai Chi. And so it's important to make sure that you get connected with a level of class that's appropriate to you based on your abilities. But it's a wonderful exercise or a wonderful activity that is certainly helpful for balance. Again, depending on where your start point is with flexibility and strength, you may or may not find that it lends a lot to that, but it is really critical for balance. One of the things that we talk about in Tai Chi a lot is weight shift. And it was, when I was first learning it, it was sort of one of those sort of mind-blowing moments where they talked about, stand up and think about, as you step forward, put your heel forward and let your foot touch the ground, but don't actually shift your weight into it yet. Let there be a fraction of a second where your foot makes contact and then you shift your weight. And there's so much practice of weight shift in Tai Chi that it really teaches you how to do that and incorporate that into your walking. And the reason that matters, and it matters from a balance and a falls risk perspective, is that if you don't have that fraction between touching the ground and committing to it, if your heel hits the black ice, you're gone, right? If you feel the little slip and then you take your foot back, or it gives you just that fraction of a second to react, that can be the difference between a fall and not. So I'm a big advocate for Tai Chi for sure.
Great. Marlene has a question. She says, are you doing in-person assessments now or waiting until the lockdown is over? When you're doing them where?
Yeah, so our clinic here is at 291 Horseshoe Lake Drive in Bayers Lake, sort of just off the 103. And because we're a regulated healthcare profession, we are permitted to and encouraged to be open to help people. So we certainly are able to see people in clinic, and I had a number of clients come in today. We've got all of our COVID safe protocols in place, of course. All of our fitness classes currently, in line with COVID regulations, are online only. And we certainly have some people who we also see virtually. So we have been doing virtual visits. So it's not exactly through Zoom, but it's the same sort of experience where we can do an assessment this way. And so that's an option as well.
Great. Are there any other questions? All right.
Did anybody, can I ask a question?
Yes, you could ask a question.
Because I couldn't see everybody when I was talking. So did anybody, just show of hands, do the sit to stand test? Good. Okay. And then leave your hand up if you were surprised, good or bad, surprised at the number that you got. Good. Good. And did anybody try the fingertip balance? The difference with fingertip and no fingertip? And did you can nod, did you feel the difference that one little fingertip, like who knew your fingertip was so powerful, right? Yeah, we should all be doing fingertip exercises. No, I don't mean that. Don't do fingertip exercises. Well, anyway, thank you. That's good. I always wondered whether I was just doing those things on my own or if anybody was participating. So glad some people gave it a shot.
Right. Well, thank you again, Laura. You're getting all kinds of thank yous in the chat. I want to thank you on behalf of CARP Nova Scotia too. Remind everybody that this will be up online, available for you to look at it again or to refer to your friends. We'll also make sure that we post the contact information so you can get directly in touch with Laura and her studio. And the only other thing I would remind you all that we're continuing to do our Tuesday evening travelogue webinars so we can dream about where we can't travel these days. And so if you would like to join Danny Almond in one of those, just go to our website. You'll be able to find the link and they're every Tuesday night at 6:30. Once again, thank you, Laura, very much. Thank you, all of you, for joining.
Thank
I
you.
don't know whether I should say this or not, but I will. But you know, other than the medical marijuana workshop, we had a higher attendance tonight than any other workshop online this year. So,
Fantastic.
so it's wonderful. And thank you, Laura. It was a great presentation. Thank you
Great.
all for attending.
Thank you so much. My pleasure.